It gives me great pleasure to chair this session and to welcome Zaki Mehchy and Rabie Nasr, who will speak on researching Syrian agriculture in times of war. I heard they are both researchers at the Syrian Center for Policy Studies. I heard them speak 6 months ago now, or 4 months, more?
It's 9 months.
Okay. 9 months ago, but it's very vivid in my mind, on the large report that they had done, and I was terrifically impressed. And so I'm very happy that they're going to be speaking. Actually, they're going to do a joint presentation on, have you given it the title, The Crisis Impact on Food Security in Syria. So they will divide the labor in speaking, but will in fact be giving a single joint presentation. So I'm delighted to welcome Zaki and Rabie to speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First of all, SCPR, the Syrian Center for Policy Research, would like to thank the organizers for the invitation and for the opportunity to participate in such an interesting conference and discussion about food security, which is a very important and important issue in Syria now during the crisis that we are going to tackle and highlight it today in our presentation. We will try to discuss or to analyze the food security indicators and analysis in Syria before the crisis and during the crisis, and highlighting the measurement tools that used before the crisis, and how we customize these tools, or I mean how the actors customize these tools to measure the food security indicators during the crisis. First of all, let us give you a quick brief about the Syrian context during the crisis. Syria now, and after about 6 years of the conflict, is facing large fragmentation, and Syria become more fragmented and dominated by several fighting, subjugating powers, including the political oppression, tyranny, and fundamentalism and fanaticism power. And of course, Syria faced a huge deterioration in all socioeconomic indicators, large destruction in terms of infrastructure, in terms of productive sectors in economy, etc. And of course, Syria lost its human capital, and in terms of education, in terms of health also. And now Syria is facing a huge external intervention, and this affects badly the Syrian sovereignty in terms of political sovereignty, economic sovereignty, and of course, food sovereignty. Now, before the crisis, we are going to tackle the food security from 3 dimensions. The first one is availability in terms of production and import and export. The second one is affordability, including pricing, subsidies, income, and infrastructure related to agriculture production. And at the end, or the last dimension, is quality and security, which include the standard and norms on quality food available for the most of, or for the whole society in Syria. Now, before the crisis, we had several data resources, mainly formal institutions, and this includes mainly the Ministry of Agriculture, which used to have units in all Syrian regions that collect administrative data to come up with the national indicators. And we have the Central Bureau of Statistics also conducting several surveys, including household survey and mixed survey, including data or indicators related to agriculture sector and food security. And also we have the ministry or the data collection tools used by the Ministry of Health. This ministry used to collect data related to nutrition, mainly related to nutrition and child nutrition, etc. Now, before the crisis, in general, Syria used to have a self-sufficient in terms of food security. And here in this table, we can see the key or the main crops in Syria. And we can see the availability and how the availability is distributed between national production and imported goods. Here we can see the, for example, dependency on external parties or on import. We can see it's a kind of small, but for the wheat, for example, and cereals, we can see here an increase in 2009, 2010, and this is related to the drought happened in Syria, mainly in the northeast region, which cultivate mainly wheat and cereals production. But in general, other crops, we can see that the dependency on import is very low. Here we have indicator related to food security. In general, when you have a good food security indicators, this would affect positively health indicators or nutrition indicators. But in Syria, and due to several reasons, mainly to the ineffective institutions, we can see that there was a kind of stagnation in some of the health indicators related to food security. We can see here the child mortality rate for children under 5, which is per 1,000. It's almost stagnated. And this is also the case in the stunting and underweight and wasting. So we can see here the gap between the good or the self-sufficient or the good indicator in terms of food security and its reflection on other indicators, mainly health indicators.
We try to just to give you a brief about the methodological issues in pre-crisis, how we measure the food security and self-sufficiency in Syria in terms of the agricultural production and related industries. And this is related to the huge employment in the agriculture sector and a large, it's a long history of developing this sector. There is different tools. We just bring some highlights of these tools that have been used to measure the food securities. We are not going to go into details before the crisis, but after we finish this, the methodological aspects and approaches, we go through how we deal with the crisis issues, and then we go through the actors and the political economy of food security in the second section. In this chart, we use the multidimensional poverty index and multidimensional poverty for children. Now, this is the multidimensional poverty in general for the population, and there is a methodology for that. But the issue here that there is, we used it as a composite index from stunting, wasting, and underweight to see to what extent the household suffer from a problem in the of malnutrition. If there is one case of malnutrition in the household, we call them, it's multidimensional deprived. So this is the definition of the multidimensional poverty, and it is a composite of education, health, and other living condition indicators. In this picture, we can see that there is improvement in the health since 1993 in the nutrition until 2009. And this is the improvement of, in general, in terms of health for the spread of the health services, is yet not receiving a low malnutrition for children. We still have in 2009 suffering from, first, a high malnutrition rate. The second thing is, as you see the map, the imbalance between the governorate. The most affected governorate in this regard, it's the north-south, which is the basket of food of Syria. So the richest governorates is producing the food and producing the oil as well, and they are suffering in terms of human development, in terms of nutrition, education, etc. So it's a real deprived and marginalized area in Syria.
Now, moving to the crisis and measuring crisis impact on food security. Of course, during the crisis, there are many challenges to measure food security or to conduct any kind of measurement in terms of socioeconomic indicators in general. And this is due to several reasons, including the fragmented institutions. And these fragmented institutions is a reflection of the fragmented power dominating Syrian region. So we have different institutions dominated by different powers. So there is no coordination between these institutions to conduct, for example, a comprehensive survey or a survey that covers all regions in Syria. And of course, we have the weaknesses related directly to the instability and to the continuation of the war and armed conflict. And this includes lack of access or difficulty to access both market and land, for example, or to access also the raw materials market for farmers. And we have the issue of lack of human capital, because many people who are able to conduct surveys and conduct this kind of statistics are out of Syria. Also, there is an issue of transparency. The current institutions cannot discuss the results in transparent way, because any indicator now in Syria is being politicized. So all the, let's say, subjugating powers are trying not to conduct or not to issue any indicators, so this cannot be used against them. Of course, there is a bright side in all these weaknesses or all this environment, crisis environment, which is the civil society and civil society initiatives who are doing their best to overcome the issue of food security in several regions. For example, many civil society are conducting now initiatives related to small-scale agricultural productions in their region, particularly in the besieged region in Syria.
And I think this is the best solution for that is doing survey about Syria outside Syria. So that will be feasible in this situation. But another thing, we don't have enough time to discuss the details about, for example, we said that there is a good side that the civil society is doing their best to conduct research and to support people. But there is another side that a part of the civil society alienated in terms of supporting the war and supporting the armed conflict. And this is a very crucial issue that the people are divided and polarized, using this identity politics, divided the civil society as well. And this is the challenge that we face to how to interview people if they are really don't want to hear, or they hate the other because of all the circumstances of war. So there is two main approach to measure the food security in Syria, on the macro level and on the micro ones. On the macro level, we know that there is a lack of national accounts now in Syria. The Center Bureau of Statistics don't have the reach for the whole of Syria, and they reduce their efforts to the minimum because it's not very necessary for the regime to continue the war. And so the minimum of efforts of the Center Bureau of Statistics made a gap for the national accounts in Syria. That's why in the center we decided to do this exercise through the quantity proxy. Why we use the quantity proxy? Because it's very simple that there is a huge fluctuation in the prices during the war. So if we want the real improvement in terms of the production and in terms of the value added within the economy, we go through the quantities. And this is the best proxy to the real improvement. Otherwise, we will go through a mess of prices, which will be a huge misleading in terms of the growth and recession that's happening in Syria. And this is very nice that you can see anything, I guess. But this is how we deal with the agricultural sector. We go through, as you see on the left, that, for example, we start with wheat. We go through this production. We have the history of the GDP of this production, and we have the quantity. For example, in 2011, there is 3.9 million tons of wheat in Syria. We start to go through each of these crops across quarters. And this is to see the dynamic of the economy and the impact on the agriculture through each quarter in the year. And we see these quantities through different methodologies. The first one is to go through the land used for each of these crops. And then we go through to see to what extent there is a reduction in the yield on this in each of these crops. And there is another administrative information about the estimation of production in each of these crops. It's not complete, so we try to complete the picture from different aspects. And the last thing that we discuss with experts in each one of them, to what extent this estimation is close to the reality within this situation. So we try to build this kind of matrix about the different animal and plant production.
Yes, here also we used, in addition to what Rabie said, administrative data, discussion with experts, meeting or conducting focus group with experts working on agriculture sector. We also used proxy to estimate the production of, for example, we have the eggs, the total production of eggs. So we use it as a proxy to estimate the number of chicken or poultry activity. Now here based on that, we have the accumulated number which reflects the agriculture GDP during the crisis. And here we can see the decrease of the agriculture sector in terms or in 2000 constant price between 2011 and 2015. And here between 2014 and 15 we see a slight increase, which this is because or due to the climate or good weather condition or good climate condition in 2015, but it's very slight and it's not huge. Now, the second tool in terms of macro approach to measure indicators related to food security, we have the export and import or mirror data. Because in time of crisis, it's very difficult to collect this kind of or this type of information from formal institution. So we have this mirror data basically from the WITS database. And we can see here the trade food deficit in specific type of food. We can see that this deficit occurred before even the crisis, but taking into consideration that this number is out of the a GDP which was about 60 billion in 2009. But in 2014, this is out of about 20 billion. So the share of trade deficit as a percentage of the GDP is increasing largely.
Yeah, I think the mirror data is very simple. That we go to the Turkish statistics and we see how to what extent they export to Syria and what they import from Syria, and we go through the whole country around the world. So this is the situation, how to see what we export, because we don't have most from the most and our most borders are not under formal institutions and registration. So we can analyze and understand this from the picture from other countries. This has a huge problem. For example, there is a lack of transparency in the statistics in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Iran, and so you can't understand really the situation. It's always a proxy. So we depend more on to see the situation from inside, and that's why we do the survey on the micro level.
Now we can analyze the food security using the macro approach by using the food prices approach to see the reflection or the impact of the crisis on the food prices. And here we can see that the CPI for food is increased much highly than the total CPI. So, and this has a direct impact mainly on poor segment of the society, because this is food and this reflects the basic food prices.
And this reflects the demand on food during the crisis. There is a shift in the demand toward more food in their basket and their expenditure. So they allocate their income to their priority as they lose a lot of their resources.
Now, in addition to the macro approach tools, let's say, we have the micro approach during the crisis, and this includes household surveys and the population status survey that we contribute in conducting this survey in 2014. Now, conducting household survey is very difficult during the crisis due to several reasons. Methodologically, we cannot design our sample during the crisis because the sampling framework is changed due to the displacement and due to unfortunately, to the loss of too many lives in Syria. So the framework is changed, so it's not correct, if we can say, to use the sample size or to conduct survey using sample size. However, several organizations conduct household survey, but in specific region, and this only reflects the situation in this region. Moreover, this is a bit biased. For example, they can conduct only in the region under the control of the regime and not in the conflict region, which faced more difficulties in terms of food security. We can use the historical data of household survey to estimate the impact of the crisis on food security. And here, the center used the micro simulation to conclude the food poverty from the household survey in 2009, or to estimate the food poverty during the crisis using the household survey of 2009. And here we can see the large increase in food poverty or in abject poverty between 2011 and 2015, and here it reached also almost 45%.
Of course, to do the micro simulation, we use the prices across the regions to use it to see the cost of the calories and how this affect the people consumption. Now we will go through the population survey. It was very difficult to see how we have how to understand the situation without doing a comprehensive survey that has different aspects. We do it from a broad developmental understanding that we need to understand the demographic situation, economic, social, and institutional issues. Otherwise, we will miss the picture of very important dynamics across Syria. And it's not available to do the household interviews. And this is very simple, that during the war, there is a fear, there is a bias, there is a polarization. If you go randomly to the people and ask them, you are facing a huge bias in the answer, especially if you are asking about social cohesion, or you are asking about institutional performance and corruption and number of deaths, etc. So since we don't see that this is a feasible situation, feasible tool, we decide to do area-based. It's a multiple approach, or a multidimensional approach, but it's based on a small community and understanding the indicators in this small community through different layers.
We had about 700 regions in Syria, and the division of this, or the selection of the division of Syria into these 700 regions, is based on specific criteria that is related to the impact of the crisis on each region. So we have each region had almost the same impact of the crisis in terms of IDPs and destruction of building and infrastructure, etc. So we have 700 regions. We prepare a questionnaire which covers several dimensions, and we had 3 key informants from each region. So in total, we had about 2,100 key informants with the same questionnaire, and we have 3 key informants from each region. And at the end of the day, the researcher who conducted the interview with the key informants sit together to come up with a merged questionnaire and a merged data about the studied region, depending also not only on the key informants' information, but also on their own observations, because the questionnaire include a section on the researcher observation. And of course, the researcher also has secondary data from different resources, so they can check for the credibility or for the information that is provided by each key informant.
The researchers are from the regions or from the governorate. If we can't have a researcher from the region, so they are from the governorate, and they decided how to divide the areas. So we put the rules, but they do the division because they understand the situation there. And the other issue is how to merge. We put the rules, for example, if there is 3 key informants, and they estimate the number of population in this small community, and the difference between them exceed 10%, so we ask the team to come back to the field. How to come back to the field? First, they come back to the 3 key informants to check with them if they are sure that this is the number that they decided, that this is the number of population there. If the difference continued, we go through choosing another 2 key informants. So we will have more information, and this has helped us a lot to reduce the biasness for some people to exaggerate the situation in terms of number of IDPs or number of population. And this is, we do this several times, and then if we fail to have a probability that the population within margin error of 10% is like this, we go through a focus group on this region. So it was a long story to continue all of these until we understand that this region is reflected in terms of this profile of different indicators in a robust way.
And there is another point related to the hot areas or conflict zones. We use several tools to reach these areas or this region. We used phone call or internet interview with the key informants there, or we meet the key informant in other region. Of course, taking into consideration the code of ethics to be aware of the safety of key informants and safety of researcher, etc. We're going to skip the, this is general information about the survey. Here we can see that the total number of questionnaire is 2,700, and it's more than 2,100 because in many regions we had to repeat the questionnaire because there was a kind of biased information.
This is just some of the results before we go through the second section of this analysis. This is the affordability of household to obtain basic food. So this is, as you can see, the situation during the crisis, and this is of course we have the 700 results, 700 areas, but we have this kind of weighting, and we weight by the population of the area. And we have a different indicator for the IDPs and for the hosting community. So it's kind of differentiating the situation of both of them. But this is for the whole of the population in the areas. And you can see that if you look to the green, which is that the situation is good, so the people can have or afford to have a basic food, you can see that the percentage is very low, and in some governorate with high level of conflict, there is a real suffering. Of course, as we can say, it's not enough to go through the governorate. You have to go through the details of if the areas there's a besieged areas where the situation is completely poor.
Now here we have the household food consumption structure in terms of the food categories used by household during the crisis and before the crisis. It's kind of comparison because the questionnaire, the population status questionnaire, each question has pre and crisis answers. So here we can compare the food consumption structure in terms of the consumption of household. And we can see that the percentage of bread is increased largely, comparing between before the crisis about 40%, and it reached about 55% in 2014. And of course, we see here a decrease or a huge decrease in consuming meat. This is due to several reasons, of course, mainly to the price or to the high price of meat and the bad economic situation of households. This is more detailed about the food structure. Here we have the bread consumption, and we have it by governorate. So we can see the difference between pre-crisis percentage of bread consumption compared to the crisis time. And we can see that this increased in all the governorate, and it differentiate between the region and governorate. And here we have the same for the meat. We see a large drop of consuming meat in all governorate in Syria.
This is another chart. If you compare between 2010 2014, you can see in 2014 there is a new provider for food, which is the international organization, which contributed on average 12% of the food of the households on average across the country. So there is a new player to contribute to providing food for the household. And of course, this is the structure, but the level is, there is a huge drop, as you can see in as you saw on the first chart about the GDP of agriculture. There is a huge drop on the production and in the consumption, but this is how the structure of the providers for the household. One thing that it's important that it could be we could have a serious work on data and surveys, research within conflict area. If we have people from inside the country want to do this work, they have the incentive to do this work because they feel that this is a public good. Otherwise, you will have a lot of troubles across the country. We work with the people in the regime-controlled area and in the opposition-controlled area with different key informants, and they trust that we are working. It's not a donor-driven. We will publish the results. We promise them all that this is for publishing. It's not for hiding in any drawers or to be going as a commodity in the market. So we think that this is a very important step to do it, that the civil society take the lead and the people from inside the country. This will reduce the security issues. The people will trust the survey and will cooperate. And on average, each key informant from 2,101 spent on average more than 4 hours with the researchers. And the whole budget of the survey was less than $40,000. So $40,000, it's a cost of having a Skype interview with 20 persons with other organizations. So it's you will understand the situation more if you are close to the people and you understand that you are serving a cause for them. Otherwise, it will be very difficult. We think that the cooperation with different people, different institutions is very important. And that's why it's very important not to link the people who is doing the survey with subsidies. When the UN go to do a survey, the people will bias their answer or because they understand that it might be subsidies, it might be a benefit from this. So it's very important to see who is the independent party to play this role.
Now, moving to the second section, let's say, from the presentation, which is about the policy and actors in terms of food security in Syria during and before the crisis. And here we are going to highlight or to provide a quick brief about the political economy of food security before the crisis, and then we will analyze or discuss the crisis challenges in terms of food security in Syria.
Agricultural sector in general is a successful story in Syria. After the independence, the country always we have this variety. We have the biodiversity, and there is a very famous production of agriculture. I hope you are okay. This is a need for new infrastructure. Okay. The issues. There is a lot of investment in this sector, especially in the 60s and 70s. There is a leftist party, the Ba'ath Party, which is try to invest in the farmers and labor connection and relations, and this is very important, let's say, base for this kind of governance, that those are the people who are supporting this governance or this regime. And there is a need for food security for the country with weak institutions and with a lot of demand for people with high population growth rate and fast improvement in health. So there is a very need for food security in terms of from political point of view and from economic point of view. Unfortunately, we have the collapse of the 80s in Syria, and not a lot of researchers concentrate on the difference between the institutions between 80s and after 80s, because the people just think about that there is one regime and the situation is the same across the whole years. The 80s changed the situation and changed the base and the governance in Syria. The security started to be very much in control of the policies and ignoring a lot of the base of the people and the voices of the people that usually support this kind of paradigm of development. So this reflected on the labor union and the trade union and on the farmers as well. In the 80s, we have drought, we have the sanctions, and we have the conflict within the country, and we have wars across the region. And there is let's say, the cut of the subsidies or the support from the Gulf countries. So we have a huge failure in development in the 80s, which is reflected on the country. And the reaction for that was to provide a food security for the country. So this is one of the reaction in the late 80s and early 90s. So they start to give a huge investment in irrigation, and the government started to give a lot of subsidies in terms of fertilities and fuel subsidies for the farmers and loans for them as well, which is increased dramatically the production of agriculture in Syria in different way. And even for the fruit and for vegetables, there is a midterm loans started in the late 80s and early 90s, which increased the production of agriculture. And this is reflected in a very good situation in terms of the availability of food security.
Now, starting, during the first decade of the new millennium, there was a large introduction of new liberal policies, and there was a large lift of the subsidies provided by the farmers and food subsidies for the consumers. So there was a large increase in the price of food and in the price of raw materials used by farmers, including fertilizers and seeds, etc., which used to be subsidized. Of course, there was a huge failure in introducing the modern irrigation system, and the government spent a lot of money to improve the irrigation system and make it modern, but it was a huge failure for the government due to the weak institutions and the corruption. And of course, during the last decade, we see a large increase of the informal sector and the reallocation of resources, particularly human resources, from agriculture sector to other economic sector, particularly to the service sector in Syria, which was booming, reflecting the dependency of the economy on rent sector, like real estate and insurance and banking system.
There is a lot of discussion in Syria during the 90s and early 2000s about the liberalization and the integration in the market economy, etc. And the situation was the absence of the clear vision, or even the absence of the clear message for the people. So there is no clear vision about liberalization, but we do the liberalization. We don't have a clear strategy to go to the free market economy, but we go through the free market economy. So always this kind of, this is the political oppression. Today we didn't start with the roots of the crisis, but this is one of the roots that the political oppression prevent people from participation and prevent people from expressing their interest, even the farmers. And after the one kind of this liberalization, that in the year of the drought, 2008, the year of severe drought, the government liberalized the prices of fuel and fertilizers. And the liberalization was 3 times, it's 300% increase in these fuel prices. They exactly ignore that there is a collapse in the East region, and which is reflected after that by you go and you see empty villages. Of course, connecting this to the crisis of Syria as the drought is causing something is something trivial. This is not a serious cause to discuss about what's happening in Syria, because we think that there is a huge accumulation of deprivation in the political participation across the country. It's not about environmental change, but this is one way of understanding the failure in the policies. There is a drought, there is a lot of depletion of the groundwater, and the government didn't give the negative incentives for them to prevent this. So we think that there is a lot of misleading policies for the agriculture and rural areas, which first of all marginalize the people and start to affect the food security. I will give another example, which is the Turkish-Syrian agreement, which has just opened the door between Syria and Turkey in 2008. And now the door is open as well. And without a participatory approach. But I mean, but this is one thing to see, that there is a huge reduction in the agri-food production and other small firms that's working in manufacturing sector because of opening to the Turkish market. And this caused a huge deficit in Syria in terms of good after 2009 and 2008. So we can see that there is a huge import of the food from outside the country started in 2008, 2009, and 10. So this is just an idea about what happened before.
And we can see in this chart a reflection of the, let's say, negative incentive provided during the last decade for the agriculture sector. We can see here that the GDP of agriculture sector during the period between 2000 and 2010 was almost stagnated, the blue one here. Whereas the GDP in general, there was a growth about 4.5% annual average of the GDP growth. And here we can see in green color the percentage or the share of agriculture GDP out of the total agriculture, and it is decreasing. The share is decreasing. So although there was a growth or an economic growth in Syria, however, the GDP was not growing at the same level.
This is the contribution of the growth rate of each sector to the total growth in between 2001 and 2010. And you can, it's almost zero, the contribution of agriculture. The mining, there is a reduction in the production of oil, so there is a negative contribution. But 90% of the growth was coming from the services. It's not that the service is bad, but if you are talking about informal services, like the trade in Syria, which is very informal, there is no protect for the labor, there is very low wages for the people. So you can see that the people are moving toward a low productive sectors, toward low decent work in many aspects. And this is the employment in agriculture. The blue line, it's the absolute number. The agriculture lost between 2001 and 2010 almost 40% of the employment. So there is a huge drop in the employment in the agriculture sector. If you are working in the agriculture in the rural Deir ez-Zor or Hasake, you have low education if you are working with your household, and so you don't have another chance. So you can see that the labor participation rate dropped across the country, and this is not just, of course, because of agriculture, but this is one of the reasons. So you can see that Syria, during 2010, we had 4.5% growth rate, which is very good, but we created just 200,000 new job opportunities. This is the need for 1 year of the people who enter to the labor market.
Now, in general, of course, the crisis imposed several challenges on the agriculture sector and on food security. But we should note that agriculture sector during the crisis plays a major role in supporting people and providing the means of living for many households in Syria. And of course, we should mention also the capping strategy adopted by households, mainly in the besieged area and conflict region, to overcome the difficulty of accessing food and to get their need or their need of basic foods. But in general, the crisis and in the availability dimension, let's say, impose several challenges. The main one is the complete or the huge destruction of agriculture infrastructure, including irrigation system and including the means of transportation used in agriculture sector. Also the fragmented region in Syria due to the crisis and due to have several fighting, subjugating powers. So each power is dominating a region, and this makes the access to market or access to raw materials market very difficult for people. Of course, there is a lot of pillage and royalties, let's say, imposed by the subjugating power on farmers and on consumers to access the necessary food. And there are also many challenges in terms of availability, there is the monopoly by several traders related to the subjugating powers, and this is the newly or the new crony capitalists emerged during the crisis. They abuse their power and they abuse the society, and they put high price for basic food, very high price for basic food. And also there is a large number of smuggled food so that they can sell it in higher prices outside Syria. Of course, this is the points related to the availability or challenges of food security in terms of availability.
There is a lot of destruction of the irrigation system, the machines, the equipment, even the samples. There is important research centers in agriculture sector in Syria, and they have a lot of pilot projects which have been destroyed. So unfortunately, we have a destruction of the environment related to water, related to the soil in very different areas. You can see in Deir ez-Zor, because of this refineries, small refineries of oil, there is a black sheep. There's a huge amount of black sheep that it's not just a joke. It's a real. And this kind of pollution on these crops and these animals will be affected the country for a long time. And the other side is the affordability, and we discussed this, and there is a lot of evidence. Of course, just we list them. We can discuss each one of them. What's the evidence for this, in terms of, for example, the effect on the infrastructure? We will present some results, but for sure, without the agriculture, we don't have a safety, and the crisis alarmed the importance of agriculture for all societies and the importance of this for the future, and we shouldn't forget this lesson. And the other thing that the policies, regardless of the conflict, is very important. So there is a policies that harm the agriculture sector, regardless the conflict issue and the violence issue. That there is a reduce of the subsidies in terms of war. For example, for bread, there is an increase of the prices of bread for 5 times during 2014, 2016. And as you can see, so you saw from the previous slides that the bread and cereals start to be the major source of calories for people. And the revenue from reducing the subsidies on bread is very low for the government. It's just $50 million per year. So you are saving $50 million per year, but you are increasing the whole other prices, because the bread is a symbol for other prices in the country. So this is kind of policies that you can understand why you are doing this. It's not rational to do this in terms of from economic point of view, even from political point of view. And this is one issue. The other issue is the fuel liberalization. You are raising the prices of fuel, and you know that the people can't afford to buy it. So the people will not have a warming, and they will not use the fuel for their small firms because you are raising the prices. And then after that, you will just rising again the prices inside the country, which will devaluate your currency. And since you don't have a production, devaluating the currencies will not help you to export, because you don't have a production to export. When you are devaluating your currency, you are importing the fuel from outside with higher prices. And then what you are doing? You will increase the prices again on the people who can't afford to do. This is a circle which will not have an end.
Yeah, we have also the challenge of the international organizations who, as we've seen before, who become one of the main providers of food in Syria during the crisis. So they provide many kinds of basic foods, but unfortunately there is a weak monitoring and evaluation system for the distribution of this, let's say, aid, and a large part of this aid is being sold for the society, not for poor people. So they are selling the aid that should be provided for free for the poor people. Now, in terms of quality and security, we can see that there is an absence of monitoring on food quality from formal or informal institutions, or let's say the de facto institutions. So there is a complete absence of monitoring for the quality of food, and this is reflected on the nutrition or on the health of the society that are using this food. Of course, there is an issue with all conditions for the production chain, or in the production chain of agriculture sector, in terms of production, in terms of storage issues. There is no good condition for storage or consumption or transporting the agriculture products, and this affects the quality of these goods for people. Sure, the crisis changed the, let's say, the food structure, as we've seen, the food structure for people, and the diet of for most people are becoming very difficult. I mean, it's becoming poor diet for almost all the segment of society in Syria. Now, talking very quickly about the how many time we still have?
Not much.
Not much. Okay, that's why. Now, having a brief overview on the food security, let's say, actors, which are the same actors on the, let's say, the Syrian crisis. We have the subjugating powers, internal and external subjugating powers, and that include all fighting parties in Syria. And we have the civil powers, and here we are talking about the society, in addition to the CBOs and NGOs that are active in terms of providing food for poor people and the Syrian society, mainly in conflict zone. And we have the third actors who are the international actors that are providing, or let's say they have two tracks. They provide humanitarian support, and at the same time, not very efficiently, at the same time they provide or they try to provide developmental programs for Syria.
We will skip the indicators to have a discussion on. Yes, and we just have. I think we forget about the right to protect. This is something, is illusion. So, or right to or even any kind of rights, right to life is very important in Syria now. But we still have this kind of the alternatives. We have to push as a civil society, we think, through using the research and evidence-based to push for more protecting the right of people to have a decent life. And one essential aspect of this to have the right to have food security. And the other thing that agriculture is the key, and I mentioned that for everything, for now, for the food security, for work, for the connection, for social harmony in the future. This is a very important sector to depend on. We think that the conflict economy has a very complicated dynamic that involves the people within the conflict. So giving negative incentives for that, and giving more incentives for the positive development through agriculture or manufacturing is very important to build a mechanism that reduce the impact of the conflict economy. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
you.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry for recognizing you. We know how very difficult the work you are doing is, and how very precious the kinds of distance and compilation and rigor that you try and succeed.
Health indicators or nutrition indicators. But in Syria, and due to several reasons, mainly to the ineffective institutions, we can see that there was a kind of stagnation in some of the health indicators related to food security. We can see here the child mortality rate for children under 5, which is per 1,000. It's almost stagnated. And this is also the case in the stunting and underweight and wasting. So we can see here the gap between the good or the self-sufficient or the good indicator in terms of food security and its reflection on other indicators, mainly health indicators.
We try to just to give you a brief about the methodological issues in pre-crisis, how we measure the food security and self-sufficiency in Syria in terms of the agricultural production and related industries. And this is related to the huge employment in the agricultural sector and a large, it's a long history of developing this sector. There is different tools. We just bring some highlights of these tools that have been used to measure the food securities. We are not going to go into details before the crisis, but after we finish this, the methodological aspects and approaches, we go through how we deal with the crisis.
It gives me great pleasure to chair this session and to welcome Zaki Mehchy and Rabie Nasr, who will speak on researching Syrian agriculture in times of war. I heard they are both researchers at the Syrian Center for Policy Studies. I heard them speak 6 months ago now, or 4 months, more?
9 months.
Okay. 9 months ago, but it's very vivid in my mind, on the large report that they had done, and I was terrifically impressed. And so I'm very happy that they're going to be speaking. Actually, they're going to do a joint presentation on, have you given it the title, The Crisis Impact on Food Security in Syria. So they will divide the labor in speaking, but will in fact be giving a single joint presentation. So I'm delighted to welcome Zaki and Rabie to speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, SCPR, the Syrian Center for Policy Research, would like to thank the organizers for the invitation and for the opportunity to participate in such an interesting conference and discussion about food security, which is a very important and important issue in Syria now during the crisis that we are going to tackle and highlight it today in our presentation. We will try to discuss or to analyze the food security indicators and analysis in Syria before the crisis and during the crisis, and highlighting the measurement tools that used before the crisis, and how we customized these tools, or I mean how the actors customized these tools to measure the food security indicators during the crisis. First of all, let us give you a quick brief about the Syrian context during the crisis. Syria now, and after about 6 years of the conflict, is facing large fragmentation and Syria become more fragmented and dominated by several fighting, subjugating powers, including the political oppression, tyranny, and fundamentalism and fanaticism power. And of course, Syria faced a huge deterioration in all socioeconomic indicators, large destruction in terms of infrastructure, in terms of productive sectors in economy, etc. And of course, Syria lost its human capital, and in terms of education, in terms of health also. And now Syria is facing a huge external intervention, and this affects badly the Syrian sovereignty in terms of political sovereignty, economic sovereignty, and of course, food sovereignty. Now, before the crisis, we are going to tackle the food security from three dimensions. The first one is the availability in terms of production and import and export. The second one is affordability, including pricing, subsidies, income, and infrastructure related to agriculture production. And at the end, or the last dimension, is quality and security, which include the standard and norms on quality food available for the most of, or for the whole society in Syria. Now, before the crisis, we had several data resources, mainly formal institutions, and this includes mainly the Ministry of Agriculture, which used to have units in all Syrian regions that collect administrative data to come up with the national indicators. And we have the Central Bureau of Statistics also conducting several surveys, including household survey and mixed survey, including data or indicators related to agriculture sector and food security. And also we have the ministry or the data collection tools used by the Ministry of Health, and this ministry used to collect data related to nutrition, mainly related to nutrition and child nutrition, etc. Now, before the crisis, in general, Syria used to have a self-sufficient in terms of food security. And here in this table, we can see the key or the main crops in Syria. And we can see the availability and how the availability is distributed between national production and imported goods. Here we can see the, for example, dependency on external parties or on import. We can see it's a kind of small, but for the wheat, for example, and cereals, we can see here an increase in 2009, 2010, and this is related to the drought happened in Syria, mainly in the northeast region, which cultivate mainly wheat and cereals production. But in general, other crops, we can see that the dependency on import is very low. Here we have indicator related to food security. In general, when you have a good food security indicators, this would affect positively